I wrote down a lot of things to say. This might be a long video. Hello and welcome back. Recently, I've had a ton of requests from you guys here and on Instagram to talk about how I declutter and organize paperwork. I think it's because it's tax season and we all have a lot of important official looking documents being sent to us in the mail, and knowing what to do with all of these things can be really hard. So today I'm going to share my top tips for dealing with paperwork. My first tip is really a no-brainer, and I hesitate to even mention it, but it's to go paperless. I feel like I probably don't need to explain this one, but if you receive paper bills in the mail, usually there's a website on them that you can follow to opt into paperless statements. Or if you already have an account online with your utility company or whomever, you can go online and opt into paperless billing or statements there as well. And you can even unsubscribe from things like catalogs by going to that company's website or calling customer service. So this should be an easy one. My next tip is to gather up your important originals and keep them in a secure location. I'm talking about things like birth certificates, marriage licenses, diplomas, passports even. I know a lot of people keep these things in safety deposit boxes. I just keep all of mine in a folder on my bookshelf sandwiched between two books, and that's worked really well for me. No matter where you decide to keep these, just make sure it's a secure location and it's a place you're going to remember. Next, get rid of everything else. I know it sounds overly simplistic, and I do have some more tips that I'm going to follow up with in case you're not ready to go entirely without those documents, but I personally have never once needed that service report of my HVAC system, or that document saying that my car's oil was changed, or any of the medical records for myself that I've lugged around for a very long time. If I ever need any of those things, I can just call the place that did it and they can get those records to me. Here's an example. My cat has asthma and she needed to go see a specialist. They needed her medical history. I didn't have any of that paperwork, so I called her existing vet and they were able to fax over all of the information that the new vet needed. I didn't have those documents and everything was fine. Now, like I said, I do have other tips if you're not ready to go entirely document free, but I think it's really important, if possible, to go into this with the mindset that you're going to get rid of everything or very nearly everything. Next, let's talk about mail, which is sort of the personal bane of my existence. Now, of course, going paperless can really help here, but inevitably something is going to come through the mail. And I recommend dealing with mail as soon as it arrives. Don't let it pile up and become something that you dread dealing with. Really set the expectation that you're going to deal with mail as soon as it comes in, and then recycle what you don't need and file away the things that you do need, which leads me to my next point. Next, create separate folders for different categories of paperwork. Maybe you need a folder for medical documents or veterinary documents or car-related things. Whatever categories make sense for you, create folders for those categories and store paperwork in them accordingly. If a medical document comes in the mail, you can recycle the envelope, the return envelope, and anything else that came with it, and just take the one document that you need and file it into the appropriate folder. Now, historically, I've had 4 folders like this. I've had one for medical documents, veterinary documents, house-related things, and car-related paperwork. And I keep these in a magazine holder that's mounted on my wall between my dining table and my kitchen, because that's where I go through mail. Now, if you aren't entirely sure that you can go document free, I recommend a system like this so you can file away paperwork that you think you might need again, and then go through that store of paperwork every year to see what you've actually needed in the time that it's been stored. If you haven't needed it once in that year, get rid of it. I think this is a great way to test the waters of whether or not you can go document free and what kind of paperwork you might legitimately need to hold on to. If you decide you want to adopt a similar system, I really recommend you keep your folders in something like the metal magazine rack that I have, because it's limited in how much it can hold. It can't just infinitely expand to hold a growing pile of paperwork. It's finite. And so if you decide to do this, I really recommend you keep your folders in something similar that can't just keep growing to accommodate bigger and bigger piles. That will also give you sort of a built-in mechanism to know when to go back and declutter your paperwork. If it's overflowing or you can't fit anything else in it, that's your cue to revisit it. Like I said, I've kept my folders in this metal magazine rack, and I revisit it and declutter it usually about once a year, typically around tax time, and every time I've always completely cleared it out because I've never once needed any of those documents. Next, I want to talk about scanning. Now, I personally am not a fan of scanning documents and creating digital versions of them. In my experience, unless you're really religious about digital organization and naming conventions, digital documents can be almost messier than actually keeping them around in physical form. But if there are documents that you would be seriously inconvenienced not to have or that you regularly need, go ahead and scan them. But like I said, I recommend treating it as a last resort. Now, if you don't already have a scanner, great. I recommend you keep it that way. If you have a scanner in your house readily available, it makes it really easy to just sort of frivolously scan a bunch of documents that you really don't need. There are also tons of ways to get around not having a scanner. For example, your employer might have a scanner that you can use, or print shops typically have scanners. And there are also a ton of free apps you can download on your phone that make digitizing documents really easy. But I think by not having a scanner in your house, you're doing yourself a favor because you have to be that much more intentional about what documents you choose to digitize, which is going to keep your digital documents more relevant and easy to organize. In case you're wondering what has made the cut for me to be digitized, my husband and I have a shared folder that contains records that we got whenever we bought our house, receipts of having paid our taxes every year, and some warranties that my husband cared enough about to scan in. A lot of those things we actually received digitally anyway, so we have scanned very few things. Another type of paperwork that can really pile up are to-do piles, or paperwork that sort of needs our immediate attention. Now, I am really a pile shifter by nature, and so I have a couple of things to say on it. One is that having a pile of things to do in a place that you can't ignore can sometimes be motivating, or it's been motivating for me in the past because I get my clean surface back once I deal with that pile of things. On the other hand, piles, just like everything else, we can become immune to, and then we never get around to actually dealing with them. So what I've been doing lately instead is storing any paperwork that needs attention in my magazine holder in front of my folders, and then I write down on a dry erase calendar on my refrigerator. You will have seen it if you follow me on Instagram. I write down one household/admin thing that needs to be done each day, and if that to-do task has a paper element to it, then I can go to the magazine holder and take out whatever piece of paperwork is attached to that to-do item, and that's been working really well for me. I think the point is, if you have paperwork that needs your immediate attention, keep it in a specific place and have a plan for getting it done. The last three things I want to talk about are specific types of paperwork, and the first one I want to mention are receipts and warranties. So, Kitten, what are you doing? Where was I? Receipts, you want to come over here? Come. Oh, hello. Do you want to say hi? You have adoring fans out there. You done? Okay. Where was I? Receipts and warranties. So if you want to digitize receipts and warranties, you can, but receipts and warranties typically have sort of a relatively short shelf life. And so what I recommend instead is keeping receipts and warranties with the items themselves. So I'll give you an example. I recently purchased a handheld steamer and I kept the receipt around just in case I decided I didn't actually need the steamer, or in case I opened it up and it didn't work and I needed to return it, I would have the receipt. And so I kept the receipt taped to the packaging of the steamer. Now I've used it, it works great, I love having a steamer, and so I can get rid of the receipt. But if you're in a similar situation where you might need to return something in its return window, I recommend keeping the receipt with the item itself. Similarly to warranties, I can see how you might justify digitizing a warranty more than an individual receipt, but as a lot of warranties only apply to physically large, big ticket items like washers, dryers, things like that, you can also store the receipt and the warranty in a Ziploc bag and tape it to the back of the item so you always know where it is. I almost forgot one last point about receipts. If you usually pay for items with a credit card, then a lot of stores won't require you to have a paper receipt at all if they can look up the purchase with the credit card. So if that's how you usually pay, I recommend you ask around at the stores you typically shop at what their return policy is and whether or not you even need a paper receipt if you pay for the item with the credit card. You may find that you don't need to worry about paper receipts anymore at all. The next paper category I want to talk about are recipes. Now, this was actually kind of like a foreign idea. I use my phone, I use the internet to look up recipes whenever I want to find one, but I was talking about this topic to a friend and she mentioned recipes being a source of paper that she really had to declutter, and so I thought I would mention that here as well. So one, I do recommend that you use the internet if you need to look for recipes, but if you have a lot of loose recipes to deal with, or if you have recipe books that you purchased or that were handed down to you, I recommend you treat those like photographs or like books and declutter accordingly. So if you have a lot of loose recipes, gather them up, discard the ones that you don't actually want, and the recipes that you decide to keep, I recommend you store in an album just like you would if you were decluttering something like photographs, something else that's loose. If you have recipe books, I recommend you treat those like books and declutter them accordingly. The last specific category of paperwork that I want to talk about are school notes. Now, I understand that it can be hard to get rid of school notes sometimes because we invest a lot of time and money in our education, and so sort of keeping those things around can feel like a good idea. But I think it's incredibly rare to something that never happens to go through school notes once you've finished a course or graduated. So if you get sort of intellectual stimulation out of keeping your school notes, then go ahead and sort through them and keep what makes you happy, but don't keep them around with the expectation that there's something you actually need. When my husband and I married our house about a year ago, we had these 2 giant plastic tubs. I think it was 2. I'll insert a picture if I can find it, but we had a ton of school notes between the both of us in undergrad and grad school, and we pared it all down to fit inside one 12 by 12 cardboard IKEA box. Now, like I said, if school notes are something you enjoy, that you get intellectual stimulation out of, like I do, then go through them and keep the things that are really meaningful, but don't keep school notes around with some kind of expectation that they're things you actually need to reference, because you don't. Those are all of my tips for decluttering paperwork, and I hope you find some of them useful if you're in the throes of decluttering your own documents. I know that just by virtue of being written down, paperwork can seem more important than it is, but if you're in the process of decluttering your paperwork or you're about to embark on it, really think about whether or not you've needed a particular document before and whether or not you'd be inconvenienced to not have it, and let that be your rubric for deciding what you keep and what you don't. As always, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.